Welcome to this section on temperament and personal leadership. My name is Bill Stone, and in this piece we're going to be looking at openness to new experiences and flexibility. Now, we've already taken a look at agreeableness, conscientiousness, and extroversion. And openness is like those three in that it's one of those below the waterline preferences that don't easily show up on resumes. But we can discover your preferences by using instruments such as the personality style inventory from Resource Associates that we use here at Promising Futures. There are certainly other good assessments out there that can also be quite helpful. And by taking the results from one of these assessments, such as a PSI, you can begin to build that level of self-awareness that allows you to coach yourself at being more effective as a business leader. Now, if you've already downloaded the Big 5 temperament scales and you have it in front of you now, you can see where it fits into the scheme of things. If you haven't, I would encourage you to go and download it. It's not going to cost anything. And while these are offered in the sequence, they are not sequential in that you have to deal with agreeableness first and then conscientiousness, but rather they occur concurrently. They're all part of the personality, and instruments such as a PSI attempt to tease out these particular characteristics to help you develop a vocabulary for self-improvement. And as I mentioned earlier, there are other good assessments out there. The Myers-Briggs is popular. There's the DISC, which is coming on the scene, and I see has some efficacy toward this effort. The reason we like the PSI is because it's normed against particular occupational groups, and it allows you to see how you compare to your colleagues in the field. Now, the PSI uses the 5 big temperament scales to tease out an additional up to 33 scales that give us a pretty precise picture of your performance in the workplace and your performance as you interact with the people around you. But for the sake of simplicity, we're just looking at 5 of them in this series, and we're looking at, in particular, at openness right now. Now, for those of you that aren't into historical detail, Luddites were a group of artisans in the 19th century that had developed great skill making textiles. And when the textile industry became automated, their job was threatened, and they revolted and attempted to discredit and in some cases even destroy machines. Now nothing's changed. We still have folks, some of your colleagues perhaps, that resist change, see it as threatening, and at times that change is indeed a real threat. That the way we do our work, the way we create, the way we produce the items that we have for sale changes. And we're always looking for more efficient ways to do these. The trick here is to be open, but not so open that we pursue every whim. I saw on the news recently that Shaq O'Neal spends $1,000 a week on apps for his iPhone or whatever. This strikes me as perhaps being a little too open, but regardless, our task is to find the sweet spot between being open enough and agile enough to deal with change and take advantage of change in the workplace, while at the same time not just going with the wind and every whim that comes along. One of the burdens at the time of this recording that businesses face is how you manage technology. Because no matter what you purchase or what new software you put into place, you know it's going to be obsolete. So how do you balance all of that? And understanding your capacity to deal with new ideas can be very useful as we face a rapidly changing world. Back in the heyday of total quality management, TQM, I was visiting a plant, And we were going around and seeing how the new management structure that allowed employees to actually direct the plant and direct the production process was working. And as we walked around and talked to different people, I saw one woman sitting at her workstation. She was just kind of looking around, not saying too much, doing piecework and clipping along just as quickly as she could. I got the impression from her she just wasn't all that thrilled with the whole thing. So I walked over to her and introduced myself, and I asked her what she thought, and she said, "Look, I don't want to run the place. I just want to come here in the morning, fill my basket, make as much as I can, and go home." We need people like her. Not everybody is going to be the mover and shaker. Not everyone is going to be innovating. We need some people who can come to work, fill their basket, and go home. But we also need some people who enjoy change. So again, as I mentioned in the last slide, how do you find the sweet spot between the two? And part of that process is being sensitive to people's attitudes towards training and people's attitudes toward diversity among their coworkers and how they cope with that. Most effective managers are certainly open to change. Employees that complain that the goals keep changing have to be taken seriously and listened to, because maybe things are chaotic and moving along at a pace that is not productive. But at the same time, we can't stick with the old ways just because they're familiar to us. I was in one setting where the managers did not see that anything they tried was working, so they kept trying new things. This drove those who were used to regularity nuts. And there was a very important need for, number one, folks to understand their preferences, and number two, to have a constructive dialogue about how to handle the changes that were needed in order to solve the business problems that were facing the company. So again, two things here: the self-awareness is important, and the dialogue is going to be important, so we don't get stuck, but that we don't just change for change's sake. During a hiring interview, it's instructive to ask a prospective employee what kind of changes they've been through and what they did. It's also important to ask them how they felt about the change. What was their opinion about what was going on? What were the dynamics? What sort of leadership did they provide? Or in fact, if they were just sort of sucked into the vortex of the change, how did they manage to cope with that? Again, keep in mind we need both sides of the coin. Folks who might resist and be hesitant to change, and folks who are ready to charge ahead at a moment's notice. If you have someone who is working already and you're doing a performance review with them, you can ask them how the company could change. If they say, "I like everything the way it is," well, that'll tell you one thing about them. If they have some ideas for change, you may benefit by this opportunity they have for expressing themselves. Keep in mind there's a great deal of power for people when they feel like they're being listened to and being taken seriously. You may not be able to utilize their suggestions or want to respond to their frustration, but at least make sure they understand that you understand. As the saying goes, strive to understand before you try to make yourself understood. If you haven't downloaded our handout, the Big 5 Temperament Scales, once again, here is that resource that you can tap into. And I hope you're feeling good about the whole thing and the things we've been talking about so far, because we're going to take those good feelings and look at emotional resilience in the next segment. This is Bill Stone, and I hope you'll open up the next workshop and be with us again.